A racist police officer blatantly stops the car of a black millionaire elderly man simply because he suspects he is inappropriate for the luxury car he is driving in a wealthy neighborhood. Despite the man's explanations, the officer's suspicions only grow. However, the shocking truth revealed afterward turns the entire situation around, forcing him to kneel and apologize. This encounter serves as a profound reflection on prejudice, assumptions, and the depth of human values. The late afternoon sun shone brightly over the pristine streets of Clearwater Hills. Tall, well-manicured hedges bordered the driveways of opulent mansions, and gleaming sports cars idled quietly on the polished cobblestone. This tranquil scene was interrupted by the soft hum of an obsidian-colored Rolls-Royce Phantom moving smoothly through the neighborhood. Behind the wheel sat Mr. Bernard Ellis, a dignified elderly man with silver hair that contrasted against his dark, polished skin. Bernard had just concluded a productive meeting about expanding the scholarships his foundation provided for disadvantaged youth. Driving through Clearwater Hills brought him a sense of peace, as it reminded him of his hard-earned success. As Bernard approached a stop sign, he tightened his grip on a gold bracelet circling his wrist, a family heirloom that once belonged to his late brother. The piece was more than jewelry. It symbolized their shared struggles and triumphs. He often touched it for reassurance in moments of doubt. Suddenly, his reflective moment was broken by the piercing blare of a police siren. Startled, Bernard glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the flashing red and blue lights of a patrol car signaling him to pull over. Confused, he checked his speedometer. He was well under the limit. Bernard frowned but complied, steering his car to the curb. Officer Colin Draper exited the patrol car, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the luxurious vehicle with suspicion. He adjusted his belt as he approached, his hand instinctively resting near his holster. Bernard rolled down his window calmly, his expression neutral yet alert. The officer's gaze flicked between Bernard and the interior of the Rolls-Royce, as though struggling to reconcile the two. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" Bernard asked, his voice polite but firm. Colin narrowed his eyes. "What brings you to Clearwater Hills?" "I live here," Bernard replied evenly. "I'm on my way home." Colin's eyebrows lifted in disbelief. "You live here? Where exactly?" 1520 Sycamore Lane, Bernard answered, his tone measured. He had lived in this neighborhood for over 15 years and had seen his share of subtle and not so subtle racism. The officer's expression hardened. "License and registration." Without protest, Bernard retrieved his documents and handed them over. Colin studied the paperwork briefly but appeared unsatisfied. "Do you own this car?" he asked. Bernard raised an eyebrow, his patience waning. "It's registered in my name, as you can see. Is there a reason you stopped me?" Colin's eyes darted to the gold bracelet Bernard was holding. "That bracelet," he said abruptly. "Where'd you get it?" Bernard's grip tightened on the bracelet. "It's a family heirloom. Why do you ask?" The officer ignored the question. "Step out of the car, please." Bernard's calm demeanor faltered slightly. "Why? My paperwork is in order, and I've done nothing wrong." "Step out of the car," Colin repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. His hand hovered near his gun, and Bernard knew compliance was his only option. Slowly, he opened the door and stepped out, standing tall despite the indignity of the situation. By now, a small group of neighbors had begun to gather, some filming the encounter on their phones. "That's Bernard Ellis," one woman whispered to her friend. "He's lived here for years. What's this about?" Bernard met Colin's gaze steadily, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I'll comply with your orders, officer, but I find this treatment unacceptable." "Don't do anything sudden," Colin warned, his hand still on his belt. "I am an elderly man," Bernard said pointedly. "You think I'm a threat?" Colin's face flushed, but he remained silent. The tension between them was palpable. A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. "He's being profiled," someone muttered. Bernard's composure didn't waver, even as Colin's suspicion showed no sign of abating. The officer insisted on running a thorough background check, taking Bernard's ID back to his patrol car. Bernard stood by, his posture dignified, but his eyes betraying a deep disappointment. He knew this wasn't about a traffic stop. It was about being a black man in a space where some believed he didn't belong. Minutes later, Colin returned, his expression unreadable. He handed Bernard's documents back without a word, but lingered awkwardly. Bernard reached for them calmly. "Am I free to go now?" he asked, his voice unwavering. "Yes," Colin muttered reluctantly, stepping aside. As Bernard got back into his car, he noticed the silent stares of the neighbors and the steady hum of the recording phones. He drove away without another word, leaving Colin standing alone on the sidewalk. Later that evening, Bernard received an unexpected phone call from his assistant. She informed him that an anonymous donor had come forward to cover the cost of a young girl's life-saving surgery through Bernard's foundation. He was moved but distracted by the events of the day. Meanwhile, back at the station, Colin's mind was restless. The name Bernard Ellis echoed in his thoughts. He couldn't shake the memory of the man's composed yet piercing gaze, or the bracelet he held so tightly. Unable to focus, Colin decided to research the name. He discovered not only that Bernard was a longtime resident of Clearwater Hills, but also the founder of a renowned charitable organization that had transformed countless lives. One name in particular caught Colin's attention: his own niece. Her life had been saved through the foundation's work. Stunned, Colin sat in silence, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. He realized that the man he had treated with such disdain was the very person who had indirectly saved his family. Determined to make amends, he reached out to Bernard the following day. When Colin arrived at Bernard's home, he found the older man seated on a sunlit porch, sipping tea. Bernard's expression was neutral as Colin approached, though his eyes held a trace of curiosity. "Mr. Ellis," Colin began, removing his hat, "I need to apologize for my behavior yesterday. I was wrong, and I let my biases cloud my judgment." Bernard studied him for a moment before responding. "Are you apologizing because you discovered who I am, or because you understand what you did was wrong?" Colin hesitated, his face reddening. "Both," he admitted. "I've realized I need to change. What I did to you was unfair and disrespectful." Bernard's gaze softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. "Words are easy, Officer Draper. Change is harder. If you truly want to make amends, show it through your actions." Colin nodded earnestly. "I will. And if there's any way I can contribute to your foundation, I'd like to help." Bernard's lips curved into a faint smile. "Good. Let's see if your actions match your intentions." In the weeks that followed, Colin immersed himself in volunteer work with Bernard's foundation. He attended workshops on unconscious bias and began advocating for systemic changes within his precinct. Gradually, he earned Bernard's trust and the respect of those around him. One day, Bernard invited Colin to an event at the foundation. As they stood together on stage, Bernard addressed the audience. "This man once judged me based on my appearance, but today he's here as an ally. It's proof that even the deepest prejudices can be overcome with understanding and effort." The audience erupted in applause, and Colin felt a mix of pride and humility. He knew his journey was far from over, but he was committed to continuing the work of dismantling prejudice and building bridges. Together, he and Bernard had turned a moment of injustice into a powerful lesson in redemption and the transformative power of second chances.